You crash land on an unknown planet that's completely covered in ocean, and the only sign of human life is the wreckage of the Aurora, the ship you crash landed in. But you'll never find any other survivors, you'll always be too late for that. The only thing left of them is some recordings of their last moments as they face their certain demise. So you're all alone on this planet, or are you? Venturing further away from your tiny life pod, you'll eventually face unimaginable horrors such as the Reaper Leviathan, a giant beast that can crush your submarine with its jaw alone. And the Reaper Leviathan is just the start, as Subnautica will make you face some of the best horror that gaming in general has to offer. Although before I begin talking about Subnautica, I'd like to quickly ask that if you do enjoy this video going forward, then please make sure to smash that like button, leave a comment down below, and hit that big red subscribe button, because I'm currently aiming for a total of 1,000 subs by the end of the year, and any help in that goal would be really appreciated. However, with that all said and done, let's go ahead and dive on in. So, Subnautica begins with the Aurora crash landing on planet 4546b, a planet mostly covered in ocean, and the game itself revolves around you trying to survive and escape this planet, all whilst learning of the secrets it holds. And as you learn more about this planet, you'll realise that your crash landing wasn't as much of a mistake as you thought it was. Although I'll talk more about that later, because at the moment I'd like to talk about the atmosphere of Subnautica, because I believe it's the scariest part of this game. But why, you may be wondering? After all, most of the game is very calming. In fact, I reckon you could even use some locations in the game as a background for your lo-fi hip-hop beats radio. But that's only a part of the game. Once you leave the safe shallows and beautiful mushroom forest, you'll find yourself in the barren dunes, which are more like wastelands that don't even slightly resemble the beautiful landscapes that this game has shown you so far. And these dark waters are made even worse by the sounds of leviathans crying off in the distance as they seek food, which you're likely going to be if you don't haul ass. But the scariest part of these wastelands is not the Reaper Leviathan, it's the thought of the Leviathan. After all, there is no greater fear than the fear created in our own head. When we see these dunes that look as if they stretch out for an eternity, our brain forces us to think that they do. We're also likely to consider the fact that the Leviathan is just ahead of us, even if he's not. Once we see the Reaper Leviathan, it becomes less scary, but before that, our brain is allowed to run wild and our imagination creates much greater horror than any game can. So looking out into that dark and empty land right in front of you is probably one of the worst feelings you can ever have. Nothing is more scary than the unknown. That's why our brain tries to fix that, but in the end, it can't, and we only end up facing even worse horror. However, I feel like I'm getting a little too deep, pun fully intended, so I'm gonna move on now and talk about some really good places on the Subnautica map, because I've really only focused on the dunes so far, even though there are plenty of other terrifying locations like the underwater river. A murky green river hidden deep in the ocean that's home to multiple colossal skeletons and a new type of leviathan named the Ghost Leviathan, a beast similar to the Reaper Leviathan, but unlike the first one we've seen in Subnautica, this one has translucent skin, which sounds a bit worse because an invisible monster is a pretty scary thing, but you would have to have very bad vision to not notice this thing, so they kind of missed what they were going for with the Ghost Leviathan. But that doesn't matter, because the scariest part of the underwater river was never the Leviathan. It was how you interpret it, and I think that's a big part of how Subnautica creates horror. We see the aftermath of something, and our brain tries to explain it, like the giant skeleton near the entrance to the river. How could something that makes even Leviathans look small be killed? Our brain tries to answer that question, and as a result we get a much scarier story. Although I think that pretty much sums up the underwater river, for now at least. So I'm gonna move on and talk about the lava biome, which is basically the endgame area in Subnautica, and this whole biome actually surrounds a massive structure called the Lava Castle, a giant castle made out of hardened magma that looks absolutely stunning. But the best thing about the castle is that it forces you to ascend upwards so that you can find an entrance into the castle. But why is that so good? Well, it's because of a certain someone who just so happens to be swimming around in the lava biome. This mysterious someone is of course our next Leviathan, the Sea Dragon Leviathan, a giant beast whose screams can be heard throughout the entirety of the lava biome, and the atmosphere is just so great as well, primarily due to all of the rising smoke that makes the water in the area look so dark and dirty. But moving on yet again, because I now want to talk about the precursor bases. But what are the precursors? Well, they're a species that arrived on planet 4546b 1,000 years ago, searching for a cure to the Caverns, a deadly virus that you'll end up contracting during your playthrough. And you also learn that they're the reason that you crash landed on this planet in the first place. In fact, they shot you down using a building called the GUN, or gun, because they can't allow anyone near the planet that could possibly contract the Caverns and then take it off the planet, as that would result in the disease spreading all across the universe. And whilst playing through the game, you'll find multiple buildings constructed by the precursors. However, all of them are completely abandoned, and you're just left to wander these halls that were supposedly chocked full of an extremely advanced civilization centuries ago. And despite the fact that these places have been abandoned for hundreds of years, most of them show zero signs of decay whatsoever, which can make you question whether they really left or not. In reality, they did leave, but that doesn't make these places any less scary, and there's one base in particular that's hidden in the underwater river that's really good, because when you find it, you'll very quickly notice that this place is on its last legs. Every precursor base you've come across so far has been in pristine condition, however this one has been completely torn apart and covered in vegetation, so instantly we have to wonder what happened. Yet again, Subnautica proves just how great it is at painting a picture of destruction that allows us as the player to build a story in our own heads. Honestly, I just love everything to do with the precursors, but there is actually one more place I need to talk about, and it makes every other area in the game feel like nothing in comparison, because next up is the crater edge. So, the entirety of Subnautica takes place in the crater of a giant inactive volcano, and if you go too far in any direction, you'll eventually reach the crater edge, which is basically just an abyss that's completely full of ghost leviathans. And I know that I kind of shit-talked them before, but in the crater's edge, they actually managed to be really scary. Because you're kind of just sitting in the unending darkness while multiple different ghost leviathans charge at you from every direction, which makes them a lot better because this time there's multiple of them and they're actually harder to see, which was my main problem with them before. Like, I didn't want them to be completely invisible, but making them a little harder to spot goes a long way. And also, the fact that there's no real end to the crater's edge makes this place so scary. You can literally descend non-stop and still have trouble getting to the bottom, which is just a terrifying concept, but knowing you're not alone down there makes it even worse. Although there is nothing worse than playing the game and accidentally finding yourself here. Let's say you're looking for one of the islands on the map and you accidentally go in the wrong direction and find yourself with an alert popping up on your funny little iPad telling you that you've entered a dead zone. There really isn't any worse feeling in Subnautica, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you've played the game, because it is terrifying. But enough about Subnautica areas, as I haven't talked about anything else yet, although I think that just goes to show how great Subnautica is at creating horror through its environment and atmosphere. But again, I can't solely focus on the world of Subnautica, so why don't we go ahead and instead talk about the Leviathans, and by that I mean the Reaper Leviathan, the Ghost Leviathan, Sea Dragon Leviathan, and Emperor Leviathan. And yes, I realise that I've sort of already talked about the Leviathans, but this part is dedicated to them. So let's not beat around the bush and just talk about the Reaper Leviathan, who is definitely my favourite out of the four, because out of the four I think its design is probably the greatest. Its blacked out eyes and claw-like tendrils are really good at making it look a whole lot more scarier, and the fact it can grab you whilst in your Seamoth makes it way more threatening than any other Leviathan. But on the other hand, you have the Ghost Leviathan, who's a bit all over the place. Depending on how you encounter it, it can be really scary. Like, if you come across him in the crater edge, then it's going to be scary whether you're in survival or creative, but if you just come across it in the underwater river, then it's not going to be that bad, because the Ghost Leviathan is made scarier when you can't see it, and the second you do, that changes, as unlike the Reaper Leviathan that can grab and force you to stare into its soulless eyes, the Ghost Leviathan can't. It just kind of sits there and floats around you, which doesn't compare at all to the Reaper Leviathan. But moving on, because up next is the Sea Dragon Leviathan, who also heavily benefits from its location. In fact, the Reaper Leviathan is the only one that can be placed anywhere on the map and still manage to be scary. However, that doesn't mean that the Sea Dragon Leviathan isn't a good monster. In fact, I really like its design. The inclusion of tentacles was actually a really fantastic idea. It emphasizes just how big the Sea Dragon is, and also they completely smashed the sound design out of the park. Hearing its cries from off in the distance really helps to build up tension for when you eventually encounter it, and bonus points for it being the funniest Leviathan. But what do I mean by that? Well, back when the game was still in its early stages, you could actually encounter the Sea Dragon Leviathan in a ship called the Cyclops, the biggest sub in the game. And back then, the ship was invincible, but that wouldn't stop the Sea Dragon from throwing it about, so your ship would become a glorified ragdoll in the face of this thing. So that's why I'm giving it extra points. But now on to the final Leviathan, the Emperor Leviathan, who isn't really meant to be scary, so obviously she's not going to be, but I felt wrong not including her, so here she is, and honestly I really don't know what I'm supposed to say. Her design is good and her introduction is great, but again, she isn't meant to be scary. She's supposed to be a more intelligent and docile figure, and I'm sure her design could be considered scary to some people, but in comparison to what we've already seen, she doesn't compare, although I do think an apology is in order. Sorry to the Emperor Leviathan, you shouldn't have been on this list to begin with, but you were, so from me I issue a very heartfelt apology. But with my first YouTuber apology out of the way, why don't we just rank the Leviathans and pray that I never have to make another apology. So in last place is the Emperor, obviously, as again, she shouldn't have even been on the list as she isn't even meant to be scary, but I have to rank her, so she's in fourth. And in third place, we have the Ghost Leviathan, because really its design just isn't that scary, and the only time it becomes scary is when you encounter it in the crater edge, so I have to put it in third. But in second place, we have the Sea Dragon Leviathan, who I think works really well as a late game threat because his design was great and he also helped build the atmosphere instead of simply letting the atmosphere build him. Although even though he's really great, he doesn't compare to the beloved Reaper Leviathan. I really think that Unknown Worlds knew they had just made a masterpiece of a monster when they created the Reaper Leviathan. I mean, how could they not know? His design was absolutely perfect, and anytime you see him, he looks so ominous, even if he's just sitting looking for prey. So yeah, he deserves to be at number 1. But that's the end of the ranking, and I've pretty much said everything that I wanted to for this video, although I do want to say sorry if this video did feel a little unorganized. I really wanted to talk about the horror of Subnautica and how great of a game it is, but I feel like I may have gotten a little off track at some points because my script writing skills are not exactly perfect. However, I do hope you've enjoyed nonetheless, and remember, if you did enjoy, why not like, comment and subscribe, because it really would help me out. But that's all for now. I'll be back with another Hunter x Hunter video soon, but until then, I hope you've all enjoyed, and goodbye from me to you lovely, lovely people.